everyone who's dialing in to watch this. I'm just going to do some quick introductions and then we'll give you an overview of what's going on AI regulation, as well as some compliance tips, industry perspective, and a little bit of a look to what's ahead. So first, I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Alexandre Destrel, professor of European law at the University of Namur. Alex is one of the leading academic voices on digital regulation these days, especially in Brussels, competition policy and platform governance. And he also serves as academic director at CER, the Center on Regulation in Europe. His work sits exactly at the intersection of today's discussion: how Europe can regulate powerful digital technologies in ways that are principled, effective, and still open to innovation, and indeed how other jurisdictions are doing it as well. And in particular, that's where we're joined by Giulio Coraggio, partner at DLA Piper. He brings deep practical experience advising companies on technology, data, cybersecurity, internet, and e-commerce law, with more than 2 decades working with Italian and multinational businesses. And that makes him especially well placed to speak about the real-world compliance challenges companies are facing as AI regulation moves from legislative text to boardroom decisions, product design, and deployment. Lastly, we have Catherine Chappell, who is counsel in the Competition Advisory and Regulatory Affairs team at Google. Catherine brings the perspective of a company deploying and governing frontier technologies at scale while navigating a fast-evolving global regulatory environment. Her role is particularly relevant to today's discussion because agentic AI will test not only existing competition and consumer protection frameworks, but also the practical question of how firms build accountable systems in markets that are moving very quickly. So first off, let me hand it off to Giulio. Could you perhaps give us an outline of the US, EU, and UK approaches to AI regulation?
Thanks, Kay, for the introduction. Great to be here with Alex and Katrin. And it's going to be a very interesting policy conversation. So when it comes to AI regulation, the main point is that there is no global approach to rules on artificial intelligence. There is a kind of a patchwork of three distinct philosophies shaped by different legal traditions, state industry relationships, and views on risks. All speak about responsible AI, but then they have different approaches. Let's start from the EU. Actually, today is a very important day because the European Parliament approved what is called the Digital Omnibus. These are measures that are going to simplify the provisions of the UAE Act and postpone some of their terms. We will speak about it later on. But it's a sort of acknowledgement by the European Union that the regulatory framework put in place 3 years ago was too burdensome and was risking to delay the growth of artificial intelligence. Actually, this is one of the very limited cases where basically legislation has come into place before the hype of the technology. The European Union has a risk-based ex-ante regime. So basically, the obligations are parametered to the level of risk as represented by the regulators. And so the obligations for low risks systems, AI systems, are very basic. When it comes to high risk systems, then the technical documentation, the human oversight, the transparency obligations, and the data governance obligations are really quite severe, but most of the obligations, again, are on the providers. So those that work, that control the machine, as opposed to the deployers that are the companies exploiting that solution. But be careful, because if you have an AI technology and you heavily customize that solution to your company's needs, then you need to be requalified. And then this regime needs to be seen in a context of a stream of digital regulations that came into place during the last years. So on top of the GDPR that made its 10th birthday this year, last month. Then we have the Data Act, the Digital Markets Act, then all the different legislation on cybersecurity like DORA and NIS2. And so it's really a mess because you cannot just consider the UAI Act. You need to have a system that considers all the different regulations that can come into place. When it comes to the US, the approach is totally different. We have no comprehensive federal AI legislation. We have a sector by sector and agency by agency legislation. So we have the FDA that introduce legislation for medical device systems. Then we have the FTC for consumer protection, the CFPB for financial services, and so on. So the underlying philosophy is that the market is going to self-regulate. So we need to foster innovation, and regulation might delay the exploitation of this technology and might kind of create a competitive burden that would delay the growth of US companies as opposed, for instance, to the Chinese peers. So this is really the battle on AI that is currently in place. The Biden administration had set some rules, but obviously Mr. Trump canceled all these measures, and now we are in a kind of a gray situation. Some sort of certification was announced but then postponed, and now we have a state-by-state legislation in a situation where basically the US has an enormous market influence on the growth of artificial intelligence because the main AI providers are based there. So basically, they are setting the standards and they are influencing legislators. So what's happening in the EU basically is the result of a considerable pressure by the US government and US companies on the EU. We will see how situations will evolve. Obviously, the EU wants to create its own AI champion, but we're still not there. When it comes to the UK, it's a kind of an in-between situation. There is a sort of principle-based approach. There are sectoral regulators, the ICO for privacy, the FCA, the Ofcom, the CMA, and so on. Again, there is a light touch approach as in the US, but at least there is some legislation on safety, security, fairness, accountability, and so on. Regulatory flexibility is preferred over legislation because they acknowledge that regulations cannot keep pace with the technological environment. Let's remember that the AI is so fresh. And then there are the big questions whether these open principles are enough. So in summary, just basically, the EU is setting the rules with the goal of becoming a kind of global standard. They are not there. The AI Act is not the GDPR. We will see how it evolves. The US is kind of adopting an approach where the market is going to set its own rules. But we have seen already some situations where that wasn't enough. The UK is trying to find a flexible approach that can quickly adjust on how the AI is gonna evolve. That never. It's a kind of an unknown territory. Just let's remember what the AI agents are doing in the businesses across the globe, where like 12 months ago, no one was talking about them. And this is honestly the biggest threat for any sort of business or administration, in my view. So I'm sure that these tensions are exactly what Alex and Catherine will explore in during this session. I hand it over to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. So yes, after this panorama, this international panorama, let's deep dive a little bit on the EU situation, which is indeed, as Giulio was just explaining, probably of the three the most stringent. And basically, I would say that the overall philosophy or rationale behind what is called now the EU Digital Rulebook, which includes the AI Act that Giulio mentioned, the Digital Market Act that was also mentioned, is referred, the DSA, and so on. I mean, there are, it depends how you count, but around 50 instruments which are related to one way or another to AI agent. But I think the philosophy behind is, and that's important to understand, or the legal compass, if you want, is openness and non-discrimination. And why do we want openness and non-discrimination? To promote innovation. And now, and that's a new issue a new consideration that Julia mentioned, tech sovereignty, because the thing is that if you are a small players, in general, you need access to the big ecosystem to promote your own innovation. And I like, to make the parallel with Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is clearly a disruptor in US politics. And Donald Trump needed the Republican Party, the access to the Republican Party platform to be elected. I don't think that with The Apprentice, it would have been enough, So basically, I think, because often, those kind of openness law are seen as anti innovation. I think it's the exact contrary. Now, of course, it depends on how it is implemented. So I wouldn't say that I would take for granted that those laws are perfect and will for sure lead to innovation. But I think that's their spirit, that's their rationale. And the second thing I want to push also back against is that those laws are sometimes presented by Trump himself as anti-American. And I don't think that that is true at all, or protectionist. I don't think it's true at all. I think the goal is to promote innovation wherever they are coming from. And, if you look now at the main beneficiary of those openness law, they are American firms, So I wouldn't say that it's anti-innovation or it's anti-American. To the contrary, but I guess we can discuss that, and I'm sure that maybe some of the panelists will not necessarily fully agree with this. Now let's go to the AI agent and how they fit within the EU Digital Rulebook, And here, we really face, as always, as the regulator are always facing in new technology, the pacing problem, not to intervene too early, because then you will kill innovation or reduce innovation, but not intervene too late, because then it's too late and you cannot reverse the market towards more openness, And so that's a really difficult dilemma that the regulator has to face. And it's a new one. It has even a name, the Collindridge dilemma. And Collindridge was a technologist, and he said, when change is easy, the need for it cannot be foreseen. But when the need for change is apparent, change has become expensive, difficult, and time-consuming. So really, you have a pacing problem. And the thing is that there is a perception in Europe, rightly or wrongly, but that's the perception of the European regulator, that in the platform economy, they intervene too late, and that's why it's so complicated to reverse to more competition and more openness. Now, whether the AI agent has the same characteristic of the platform economy, and whether this assessment that we intervene too late in the platform economy needs to be discussed, and that's maybe what we want to do here and elsewhere. But I think that's the basis of the problem, and not to intervene, not too early, not too late. And I would say that given the past experience, the European regulatory authority are particularly cautious of intervening too late, Now, if there is a need for intervention, and again, that needs to be discussed, the question is what needs to be done and with which legal instrument in the panoply of the digital rulebook. And I would say I see at least two streams of action that I think are needed and that we can see happening in Europe. The first is to ensure that the market is working well and that there is a competition among AI agents. Now, there is a competition today. That's undeniable. And the question is whether it will remain, because remember, with the platform economy, you also had a competition at the beginning. There was this famous quote, the competition is one click away. So I think that we have to be sure that this competition continue to be. And for that, I would say we need probably some interoperability obligation, some data sharing obligation, because they are in AI agent a data feedback loop. So mostly those two things, interoperability and data sharing. And this is exactly what the Commission is working on now with Google. And so that's great to have Catherine just after me, because the Commission is now in the process of specifying, putting a little bit more legal clarity on some of the DMA obligation related to vertical interoperability and related to search data sharing. And why the Commission is so concerned with search data sharing, I don't think to help the existing search engine like Bing or DuckDuckGo, but it's to be sure that the competition remain within AI agent between Gemini and others and others AI agent. Okay, so I think that's one thing. The second issue is in terms of protecting consumer, because yes, if the market is working well, the market will protect consumer. But the issue is whether the market will work well, and if the market is not working well, then maybe, or not perfectly, then we would need probably some form of consumer protection. And there I would say that the first thing is awareness, that we understand, transparency, that we understand how the selection in the AI agent, it was discussed in the previous panel, what they propose to you is selected, to be sure in a way that the AI agents work for the consumer and not for the company operating the AI agent. And maybe, but I wouldn't claim that it is needed. No, but this is something to keep in check. Maybe at some point, if everything else do not work, to have some fiduciary duty on the AI agent, as we have, in financial regulation, to be sure that in a way the financial advisor is loyal to you and not loyal to his company or to someone paying the agent, the financial agent. So I think we can learn a lot from what has happened in financial regulation to here. And finally, and that's my last point, one thing which is extremely important, and on which the European Commission is working, is to have more consistency among the different pieces of the EU digital rulebook. Because we have a lot, Julia mentioned some, but as I said, there are nearly 50 law. It's very, and with a number of regulator, and Draghi in his report on competitiveness of Europe has counted that there is more than 270 regulators, at the European level or the member states level, in charge of this EU digital rulebook, 270. So that's quite a lot. It's a lot of job for a lot of people in Europe, but it's very important that they work consistently with each other, and that's unfortunately not always the case. And we see that, for instance, in the context of the ongoing specification decision on the Android ecosystem, you could see that you have the competition people who have a certain view, the privacy people who may have another view, the security people who have a third view. No, I wouldn't say that those are necessarily incompatible, but it's very important that there is a discussion among all those interests and the regulator, protecting those interests, to be sure that on the one hand, the regulation which is imposed on Google is consistent across those all law, and also that it is effective and can protect competition, privacy, security, and so on. Okay, so I think that in a nutshell, I think yes, Europe is probably the most stringent regulator, so it's a very interesting regulatory experimentation to observe. I think that we have good premises, which is innovation, openness for innovation. The question is whether indeed we will deliver this, and that is, what we have to check.
Thanks, Alex. That's quite a strong supportive position on the European approach. And at the same time, I see in the comments about this kind of in contrast, the US approach, which is a little bit more abrupt with this recent national security concerns being a reason to tell Anthropic not to export the Mythos model. And that kind of approach maybe isn't as good. Obviously not for business either, because then Anthropic decided to withhold the model completely. So that kind of uncertainty is difficult, and dealing with uncertainty and advising business. Catherine, you have some sense of what that's like, and also what the practical compliance challenges are with, for example, the EU approach. Please.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. So it's right. Predictability is just such an important thing when you're advising business teams for building these technologies. What are the rules in different jurisdictions around the world? How will these products kind of operate in a compliant way? And when we think about agents, I mean, I really see it as it's a new technology layer. They are by definition orchestrators. They're interacting across systems, search engines, operating systems, cloud services, third-party applications, kind of simultaneously. And so with such a fluid, interconnected system, it can make it difficult to know how to comply, where there's sort of more static compliance rules. And one of the biggest challenges is the complexity of mapping multiple overlapping regimes onto these kind of fast evolving systems. But I think that there is, pretty broad agreement on objectives. I agree with Alexandra that, the key goals of openness and innovation, but so much of the debate is really how to achieve those goals effectively. And so, thinking about kind of ideal regulation would be clear regarding goals, but gives flexibility to companies for how to comply with those goals, and the kind of the predictability for day-to-day business counseling and decisions, because product and engineering teams really do need the clarity on what constitutes compliant design. For example, an agent, what users will be looking to agents for synthesizing information down to like single actionable recommendations sometimes. What does fair ranking look like in that situation? Without clear design benchmarks or safe harbors for agents, businesses really face a lot of legal risk just when they're trying to optimize user experience. And so, regulation that says this is the goal, but gives flexibility for how companies achieve that, I think it really would be the ideal outcome. And I think, another thing is that agents really have the opportunity, are creating a lot of opportunity and also risks, but opportunity in the form of lower transaction costs, more innovation, potentially, really truly increased choice. But yeah, risks around control points, potential bottlenecks depending on design. But so, in my view, it's a useful regulatory lens. Is not like a category specific framework, but a consistent focus on conduct and outcomes, using existing competition tools and adapting them where it really is necessary.
I think, being able to adapt the existing tools, there's definitely some adaptation going on right now. Giulio, you kind of mentioned this as well, that just a couple of hours ago, there was an announcement from the Parliament having agreed on the amendments to the AI Act. There are other changes happening as well as part of the wider omnibus. So tell us a little bit more about these changes to the laws, the timeline, and what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, we had to be transparent. We didn't know beforehand that everything's was gonna happen today, but yeah, the timing has been perfect actually. So today the EU Parliament approved the the changes to the UAI Act under the so-called Digital Omnibus package doesn't mean that the law is already in place. It's going to be published on the official Gazette and then will become applicable. It was a kind of rush because the next deadline for the UAI Act was the 2nd of August of this year, 2026, where new provisions were becoming applicable, and therefore obviously the changes had to become applicable before that. Basically, the idea behind the digital omnibus is to increase competitiveness of the European Union businesses. There was the general perception that EU businesses or even non-EU businesses operating in the European Union were not ready to become compliant. And I've seen one of the questions on the chat was everyone speaking about regulations, but no one about enforcement. And indeed, the provisions on sanctions are not yet applicable, even though some of the provisions on other areas, like those on transparency, will become applicable in around a month and half. And some provisions, for instance, on AI literacy, are already applicable. So basically, what has been done relates to the need to avoid duplication. So in regulated environments, so like those under regimes relating to medical devices, machinery regulation, and so on. There was an exemption to the applicability of AI rules just to avoid duplications. This was very much perpetrated by Germany, that has a very strong industrial environment. There were other provisions on non-consensual intimate imagery. That is a very hot topic at the moment in relation to practices against child sexual abuse. There were a delay in the implementation of watermarking obligations to identify AI-generated content. And then there were some redefined provisions on the safety components. So AI systems used only for user assistance, performance optimizations, and efficiency, automation, quality control will not qualify as safety components. What has not changed is the overall architecture around the UAI Act. So the approach on risk, that is risk-based, will remain as it is. The 4 tiers, the conformity assessment regime, the rules specific for general purpose AI systems, the role of the AI office as a sort of oversight role, and we will have to see how it works in practice, because local authorities will not give up their power, and we've seen what happened with the GDPR, where there is so much inconsistency. In relation to the timeline of the UAI Act, some deadlines were postponed. So we already have in place from February of last year the provisions on prohibited practices. Someone could argue, well, the regime on sanctions is not in place. So we have a ban, but we don't have the fines. It's also true that fines could become already applicable in relation to practices performed in the past. We have the rules on general purpose AI systems in place. The watermarking obligations on AI-generated content has been postponed to December of 2026. And then the rules on high-risk AI systems that are embedded in products or subject to sector-specific legislation, as they have been postponed to 2026, to the end of 2027, or mid-2028, depending on the annex in which they fall under the EU AI Act. Basically, the idea behind these provisions is to give a bit of more time to companies to become compliant. Honestly, I've seen advising companies in this dealing with the AI systems is that they are kind of running to adopt these solutions, but they don't have any sort of AI governance model. So they adopt these solutions. They don't know what their colleagues are doing with, for instance, general purpose AI systems. So they don't map the solutions. They don't do any sort of risk assessment. Basically, if the provisions were becoming applicable in a month and a half, then we risk that most of the businesses in the market were not compliant. And this is what the EU has been trying to address with these provisions. Back to you, Kay.
Yeah. Catherine, do you have any thoughts or comments on what was said now, and especially, I mean, this effort to reduce the complexity and extend the compliance timelines to give companies more of a chance to come in line with the requirements of the AI Act? Is the Commission doing enough, or rather, are the legislators doing enough here to help make Europe more competitive in line with the Draghi report? Any thoughts or comments on these legislative changes, or is it just causing more uncertainty that is quite frustrating from the compliance side?
Yeah, no, I think actually it's a really good example of flexibility where it makes sense. And I think it comes out of kind of, I don't know if I would say close collaboration, but at least a clear lines of communication between companies and the regulator, and understanding kind of what companies are trying to do. I think there is a sense that companies are really doing what they can to move as quickly as they can to be compliant, but that they just need more time. These systems are are evolving so quickly. You know, Giulio makes a good point about different companies have different kind of varying degrees of maturity of compliance frameworks and internal kind of processes. At Google, we have been, you know, very highly regulated for quite a long time, and I think that we really have built very robust processes internally. But even for us, you know, all of these things have been moving so quickly that it is difficult. So I really think that it's a very encouraging sign that the goal is to kind of regulate companies in a way that is still appreciates the realities on the ground.
Yeah, I think I mean one of the co-leads on the file actually the Swedish MEP Arba Kokalari said that the AI omnibus shows that politics can move just as fast as technology. And I think it's quite an accurate description of how quickly we can go from a big push to regulate, and then moving quickly and showing flexibility where companies have been able to, in the process of coming to compliance, explain the challenges that that compliance entails. Now, I do want to zoom out slightly for a moment. So far, we've been talking about AI regulation in the ordinary legal sense, what the EU AI Act, the DMA, that was mentioned as well, UK sectoral approaches, and the US kind of more hands-off laissez-faire approach has meant how companies comply and where accountability should sit. But with agentic AI, we're pushing something into a wider debate. It's no longer a question about product safety, like whether AI chatbot output is biased or unsafe or misleading. It really is whether a system that can plan, use tools, write code, and interact with other systems and pursue delegated goals will continue to do what we actually intend. This is what has sometimes been called the alignment question, but it's really in agentic form on steroids. It's not just can we trust the output of a chatbot, it's can we trust these agents to act autonomously in our digital and increasingly in our physical world. And I mean, this, not joking about the physical world, some leaders, like Argentina's president, recently called on giving legal personhood to AI. So this world is changing quickly, and this is where a lot of this debate comes into this label of existential risk. Some people hear that phrase and think it sounds melodramatic, but journalist Martin Wolf recently wrote that AI is like a nuclear weapon. I think it's a little bit more like nuclear fission, new technology with tremendous applications, some of which could cause significant harm if not carefully controlled. Now, events of these last few days, like we mentioned, Anthropic, have heightened these concerns. Whatever one thinks of the US decision to apply export controls on this, it's clear that frontier AI is not merely a consumer product or software service. Increasingly, it is a strategic and geopolitically significant capability. And that brings us to a bit of a deeper moral issue. Pope Leo XIV recently warned that in the age of AI, we have a duty to remain profoundly human. He also wrote that AI should be disarmed, not in the sense of rejecting technology, but in the sense of preventing technology from dominating humanity. There is a clear sense that we are on the cusp of something entirely new with far-reaching implications where caution is warranted, but where national interests are sometimes pushing for acceleration. I'd like to bring each of you in the last couple of minutes that we have for some final reflections. Are we grappling with the right questions here? What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, and I think you set up the things very well. I mean, on the one hand, there is a kind of international competition, not to be the last. And I was at an event last week where US representatives said very clearly, I mean, it's us or China. And so that's why we need to be fast and maybe at the risk of being quick and dirty. And so that's one hand of the equation. The other hand is, as you say, it may have some tremendous danger. And so this is why I think, and I don't know if it would be possible, but to have a global agreement on some minimum standard would be absolutely needed, exactly as we have done in nuclear. So I think that that is extremely needed, because otherwise the risk is a race to the bottom or to the top, depending of the how it will end up. But I think that would be that would be the real question. And another thing I wanted to say in responding to a question about building enforcement capacity, because it's all good to have nice rule, but if you don't have a smart enforcement capacity, they are completely useless. And I do think that, yes, Europe is trying to do that. But, the way to go is that the regulator should orchestrate an ecosystem of enforcement, basically. So as much as the platform are orchestrating their own ecosystem and make working every site in the interest of the platform, I think the regulator should do the same, and to engage, as Catherine was saying, to engage very much with industry, to engage with civil society, to engage with, other regulators in the world to try to get to a solution. But the regulator alone will not be able to make it. It needs to orchestrate an ecosystem of compliance and enforcement.
Thanks. Giulio, do you have some final comments?
Well, yeah.
1 minute.
No, absolutely. It was kind of shocking where you said that you took the Swedish regulator, the legislator is not supposed to keep up with the technological development, and it's not possible. This legislation that is changing so quickly is creating so much confusion, why regulations lead long-term investments, and the fact that sanctions are not in place is a big question mark. We have countries like Italy that last week approved a law that provides a criminal liability for the lack of enforcement, lack of adoption of security measures for high-risk AI systems. So this patchwork legislation is not helping investments. I really hope that the EU AI Act is going to become a benchmark, but the administrations in China and in the US don't seem to go to that direction.
Catherine, one final comment before we send it back to Benoit.
Sure. I mean, thinking about Pope Leo's encyclical, maybe, I think kind of core idea is that technological progress is only true progress if it elevates human dignity. And I think that, I agree, like AI agents need to be designed to augment human agency. I mean, that is the kind of point. And so to the regulatory debate, I mean, if we want to protect like humanity's role in this like new, quickly shifting world, regulation, it should be keeping pace and making and exactly in kind of conversation and collaboration with between agencies and businesses to make sure that the regulation is really getting it right. It is looking at the kind of common core obligations to really protect human outcomes. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And Benoit, sorry for going over, but I'm sending it back to you.